"Who's the woman in this photo with you, and why are those kids calling you daddy?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper as I held up his phone, the messaging app still open on the screen, and watched the color drain from his face like water through a broken dam, his coffee mug frozen halfway to his lips. "My name is Amanda. I'm 36 years old, a financial analyst at a tech firm in the city, and until 5 minutes ago, I thought I knew everything about the man I'd been married to for 8 years. But that Tuesday evening in November changed everything when I discovered an app called Signal hidden in a folder labeled Work Tools on his phone while looking for our shared grocery list app. Michael had always been meticulous about his privacy, which I'd attributed to his job as a cybersecurity consultant, respecting his need for professional boundaries and never questioning why he kept his phone face down during dinner or took calls in the garage, assuming it was just client confidentiality and the nature of his work that required such discretion. Because why would I doubt the man who kissed me goodbye every morning? We lived in a beautiful suburban home with our 2 children, Emma, who was 6, and little James, who'd just turned 4, and I'd built my entire world around this family, working from home 3 days a week to be there for school pickups, soccer practices, and bedtime stories, while Michael traveled frequently for what he said were security audits at various corporate offices across the state, sometimes gone for 3 or 4 days at a time. The photo stared back at me from his phone screen like a punch to the gut. Michael in a backyard I didn't recognize with a swimming pool, his arm around a blonde woman wearing a wedding ring that matched his, with 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, all wearing matching Best Dad Ever t-shirts, dated just 2 weeks ago when he was supposedly at a cybersecurity conference in Chicago. But what truly made my blood run cold wasn't just the photo or the dozens of messages below it discussing school events, mortgage payments on a house I'd never seen, and family vacations to Disney World. It was seeing the name at the top of the conversation that made me realize I might not even know who I'd married. The messages were addressed to David, not Michael, and suddenly every late-night work call and weekend emergency audit took on a sinister new meaning. The silence that followed my questions stretched between us like a chasm, and in those seconds, I watched my husband, or whoever he really was, transform from the confident man I thought I knew into someone scrambling for words, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water while his fingers nervously drummed against the kitchen counter. "Amanda, I can explain," he finally managed, but his voice cracked on my name, and that's when I knew with absolute certainty that whatever came next would shatter everything I believed about our life together, because innocent people don't look like they've been caught in a spotlight when asked about a photo. Looking back now, the signs had always been there, scattered like breadcrumbs through our 8 years together. The separate credit card statements that went to his office, the way he'd tense up whenever I mentioned visiting his hometown, how he'd change the subject when Emma asked why we never saw Grandpa David like her friends saw their grandparents. There was that time 3 years ago when someone at the grocery store called him Dave, and he'd laughed it off saying it was an old college buddy who was terrible with names, or how he'd insisted on handling all our taxes himself because it was easier with his consulting work, never letting me see the documents even though I was a financial analyst. The travel had intensified over the past 2 years. What started as monthly trips became bi-weekly. Then sometimes he'd leave on a Wednesday and not return until Tuesday, always with reasonable explanations about system implementations and security protocols. And I'd believed every word because why wouldn't I trust my husband? He'd missed Emma's kindergarten graduation because of an emergency breach, forgot our anniversary due to a critical audit, and just last month when James had pneumonia and was hospitalized for 3 days, Michael had been unreachable for the first 24 hours, claiming he'd been in a secure facility with no cell service. Even our families had noticed, my mother commenting about rarely seeing Michael at gatherings, my sister Rachel asking if everything was okay after he'd skipped Thanksgiving, and his own mother, who I'd only met twice in 8 years, always seemed surprised when I'd mentioned details about our life. But I'd defended him every time, made excuses when he couldn't make dinner parties, explained to the kids why Daddy missed another soccer game, because I believed in our marriage and never imagined that the man sleeping beside me might be living an entirely different life, with an entirely different family under an entirely different name. "Don't say my name like you know me," I heard myself say, my voice stronger now, fueled by a rage that had been building for years without my knowledge, and I watched him flinch as I scrolled through more messages, each one revealing another piece of this elaborate deception. School permission slips for children named Tyler, Mason, and Lily, medical insurance claims for a family in Portland, even a mortgage statement for a 4-bedroom house on Maple Street. The most recent message thread made me physically ill, sent just 3 hours ago while he was supposedly in traffic. Can't wait to see you tonight, honey. Kids are excited about the camping trip this weekend. Love you, David. Followed by heart emojis and a selfie of the blonde woman I now knew was named Catherine, standing in what was clearly their kitchen, not mine, wearing a bathrobe I'd never seen, in a house I'd never visited. I clicked on the shared photos folder in the app, and suddenly 8 years of lies cascaded before my eyes like a horrifying slideshow. Birthday parties for children who weren't ours, Christmas mornings in a living room with different furniture, family portraits where my husband stood proudly with his other family, vacation photos from the same weeks he'd told me he was stuck in boring conference rooms, and even a wedding photo dated 3 months before our own wedding. Catherine in white, him in a tux, both glowing with happiness. How long? I managed to ask, though my throat felt like sandpaper, and when he mumbled something about it being complicated, I slammed his phone on the counter so hard that Emma called out from the living room asking if everything was okay, and I had to swallow my rage to call back that Mommy just dropped something, even as my entire world crumbled around me. 12 years, he finally whispered, and the math hit me like a physical blow. He'd been with her for 4 years before he even met me, had already been a father to Tyler when he was charming me at that coffee shop, spinning stories about being a lonely workaholic who'd never found time for love, and I realized with crystal clarity that I wasn't the wife. I was the other woman who never knew it. The worst part wasn't even the deception, or the fake business trips, or the years of carefully orchestrated lies. It was the document I found next in his photos. A screenshot of a life insurance policy worth $2.8 million with Catherine as the beneficiary, while the policy he'd shown me last year was for $300,000, and suddenly I understood why he'd been so insistent about updating our wills last month, claiming it was just good financial planning. The next 4 days became a masterclass in deception, except this time I was the one wearing the mask, smiling at breakfast while documenting every lie, kissing him goodbye while activating the voice recorder app on my phone, and playing the devoted wife while my best friend's brother, a private investigator named Marcus, began unraveling 12 years of carefully constructed fraud. I'd contacted Marcus the morning after my discovery, meeting him at a coffee shop during my supposed gym time, and watched his expression shift from skepticism to shock as I showed him the signal messages, the photos, and the insurance documents, his professional demeanor cracking when he whispered, "This is one of the most elaborate cases of bigamy I've ever seen," before agreeing to take the case pro bono out of sheer fascination. While Michael continued his charade, leaving for another business trip to Seattle that Thursday, Marcus discovered the truth. David Michael Harrison, age 41, married to Catherine Harrison for 12 years. Father of 3, working as an IT consultant for a firm in Portland, with a second identity as Michael David Stevens, my husband, maintained through expertly forged documents and a web of lies so complex it required spreadsheets to track. The financial investigation revealed the scope of his deception. 2 mortgages, 2 car payments, 2 sets of college funds, and most infuriatingly, my entire $67,000 inheritance from my grandmother had been systematically drained through fake consulting invoices and transferred to accounts that funded his other family's lifestyle, including a boat I'd never seen and private school tuition for children I'd never met. I installed hidden cameras throughout our house within hours of him leaving, tiny devices that looked like phone chargers and smoke detectors, documenting everything while maintaining my Oscar-worthy performance of normalcy, even managing to laugh at his texts about missing me while Marcus sent me photos of him entering his other home in Portland, kissing Catherine hello, and playing catch with Tyler in their backyard. The hardest part was protecting Emma and James from the truth while gathering evidence, smiling through bedtime stories while rage burned in my chest, answering their questions about when Daddy would be home while knowing I was planning to destroy the only father they'd ever known, and realizing that my children were as much victims of his deception as I was, their entire existence built on a foundation of lies. By Sunday night, I had everything. Bank statements showing the money transfers, recordings of him using both names on different phone calls, documentation of the forged papers he'd used to create his false identity, screenshots of both family calendars showing how he'd juggled 2 lives with surgical precision, and most damningly, a video Marcus had captured of him at a restaurant with Catherine, toasting to their 13 wonderful years together, while wearing the watch I'd given him for our 5th anniversary. Monday morning arrived with Michael's scheduled return from his Seattle trip, and I greeted him at the door with coffee and a smile, every muscle in my body fighting the urge to throw the scalding liquid in his face while he kissed my cheek and asked about the kids' weekend, completely unaware that I'd spent those days transforming from victim to predator, setting a trap he'd never see coming. I'd consulted with 3 different lawyers through Marcus's connections, each one more shocked than the last by the evidence we'd compiled, with the consensus being that not only was our marriage invalid due to his prior existing marriage, but his financial fraud constituted federal crimes that could result in serious prison time, though they warned me to move carefully since bigamy cases could be complex when children were involved on both sides. The plan crystallized over endless phone calls with my sister Rachel, who'd flown in from Denver claiming a spontaneous visit, but really serving as my emotional anchor, holding me together when I wanted to collapse, reminding me that Emma and James needed their mother to be strong and helping me rehearse the performance of my life. The devoted wife who suspected nothing while documenting every moment of his continued deception. Catherine deserved to know the truth, but approaching her required delicate timing. So Marcus arranged for a female colleague to accidentally encounter her at her yoga studio, striking up a conversation that would eventually lead to a coffee meeting where the devastating truth would be revealed with carefully curated evidence, because she was as much a victim as I was, raising 3 children with a man who spent half his life with another family. I opened new bank accounts in my name only, slowly transferring funds from our joint accounts in small amounts that wouldn't trigger alerts, while simultaneously documenting every asset we'd accumulated during our fraudulent marriage, including the equity in our house which my lawyer assured me would be entirely mine given the circumstances, along with substantial damages for the inheritance he'd stolen through his elaborate financial deceptions. The technology that had hidden his secrets became my weapon as I learned about data recovery, retrieving deleted messages from his devices during his showers, discovering that the Signal app was just one layer of his deception. He also used encrypted email accounts, virtual phone numbers, and even had 2 different cloud storage accounts where he kept separate photo libraries of his 2 lives, never imagining that his cybersecurity expertise would be turned against him. My favorite discovery came Thursday evening when I found a draft email in one of his hidden accounts, addressed to Catherine, discussing their upcoming 15th anniversary celebration in Hawaii. A trip he'd told me was a cybersecurity conference he couldn't miss, already budgeted using money from our joint savings, which gave me the perfect timeline for executing my plan. He would leave for his romantic getaway, but he wouldn't be coming back to the life he'd built on lies, deception, and the stolen dreams of 2 families who deserve so much better than a part-time father and husband. Friday morning, the day Michael would leave for his conference, I served him breakfast with shaking hands that he mistook for sadness about his departure, even comforting me with promises that it was just a week, and he'd make it up to me when he returned, completely unaware that Catherine was at that very moment sitting in a Starbucks with Marcus's colleague, staring at photos of her husband's secret wedding to me with tears streaming down her face. The synchronization was perfect. As Michael packed his suitcase with the Hawaiian shirts he'd hidden in his office closet, thinking I'd never noticed, Catherine was calling her divorce attorney, as he kissed Emma and James goodbye, promising to bring them presents from his boring conference. She was freezing their joint accounts. And as he loaded his car for the airport, federal investigators were preparing warrants based on the evidence package I'd submitted through my attorney documenting wire fraud, identity theft, and tax evasion across state lines. I waited exactly 1 hour after his plane took off, before the plan unveiled itself like a symphony of justice. The locks on our house were changed by a locksmith who'd been scheduled weeks in advance, every penny from our joint accounts transferred to my sole control, and most satisfyingly, an email sent from my lawyer to his employer, exposing his fraudulent use of company resources to maintain his double life, including expense reports for trips that were actually visits to his other family. Catherine and I had our first conversation that evening, 2 women united by betrayal, comparing timelines and realizing how he'd played us against each other without our knowledge. Her thinking his military consulting contracts required secrecy and constant travel, me believing his cybersecurity work demanded the same, both of us funding his deception while raising his children alone, sacrificing our careers and dreams for a man who saw us as nothing more than convenient pieces in his elaborate game. The true poetry of justice came at 11:47 p.m. Hawaii time, when Michael discovered his credit cards had been frozen, His return ticket canceled, and his phone bombarded with messages from both families, his employer and law enforcement, trapped in paradise while his carefully constructed house of cards collapsed spectacularly across 2 states, 3 bank systems, and 5 government agencies that had suddenly become very interested in David Michael Harrison, aka Michael David Stevens. Saturday morning brought the full avalanche. His company fired him for fraud and threatened criminal prosecution. The IRS launched an investigation into 12 years of falsified returns. Catherine filed for divorce and full custody, and I submitted my own filing for annulment based on bigamy, while Emma and James woke up to a simplified truth. Daddy had done something very bad and wouldn't be living with us anymore, but Mommy would make sure they were safe and loved. The most satisfying moment came when he finally called from a borrowed phone, begging and crying, offering wild explanations and desperate promises, only to discover that I'd recorded every word and added it to the evidence file, his own expertise in digital security becoming his downfall as I informed him that his hidden signal messages had been recovered, his deleted emails retrieved, and his encrypted files decrypted, all waiting for him in a thick folder at the FBI field office, where agents were very eager to discuss his interstate fraud activities, false identities, and the $1.3 million he'd stolen from 2 families who had trusted him with their hearts and futures. 6 months later, I signed the final papers that erased Michael from my life, the annulment granted on grounds of bigamy, making our 8-year marriage legally void, though the scars remained as proof it had been devastatingly real. The house was mine, my stolen inheritance recovered with interest, plus a settlement from his seized assets ensuring Emma and James could attend any college they chose, their futures secured by the same documentation that had once hidden their father's crimes. Catherine and I formed an unexpected friendship, our children becoming cousins of circumstance during supervised visits while their father served his sentence, 2 families healing together from wounds inflicted by one man's need to live multiple lies. I'd returned to work full-time with renewed purpose, promoted twice as colleagues marveled at my confidence, not knowing it came from surviving the worst betrayal imaginable and emerging stronger. No longer the trusting wife who ignored red flags, but a woman who knew her worth. Emma and James were thriving, resilient in the way only children can be, understanding that Daddy's bad choices didn't make them bad, and watching them grow stronger reminded me daily that the best revenge was building a life so authentic that his absence became a blessing. Looking back at that November evening when I found his Signal app, I realize it wasn't just the end of my marriage, but the beginning of my liberation. No more wondering about his distance, no more excuses for missed moments, no more accepting crumbs from someone serving full meals elsewhere, just the truth that I deserved someone who chose me completely, and until then, I had myself, more than enough.